Kicking us off is David Robertshaw from the University of Derby. And he's going to be talking about an approach to quality assurance of massive open online courses.
Thank you very much. Well, aren't you lucky 2 Englishmen in a row? That's what I would say. And unfortunately, I've got the worst slot, which is after lunch and after a keynote. So, my angle to this is I am a nurse primarily. I also teach online. I have a nursing studies program online. So this is something I've kind of done alongside, but we're now adopting sort of an institutional approach to. So I'm going to talk about quality and what does that mean for MOOCs, and sort of propose a framework that perhaps we could use. So the last keynote talked about all these fancy pedagogical ideas, but how can we actually embed them and use them and make sure they're right? So I'm going to start by asking a broad question, which is, why do we run MOOCs? And I think there's probably kind of 4 main reasons. The first is for the world to be altruistic, to share the higher education experience and to give people access that they wouldn't do otherwise. It's to test out cool new technologies and try new ways of working. I realise it's an ancient computer, but to do that. For some sort of monetization purposes, whether you have a signature track or whether you ultimately hope to drive people to your fee-paying courses afterwards, that is an aspect. And the 4th aspect is because it's cool. So that's my 4 main reasons. But the ones I'm going to concentrate on are these 2, which is the altruistic perspective and perhaps the monetization and revenue generation perspective. So, and ultimately what I'm going to talk about is this, is if you have a bad course, a bad MOOC, then potentially that means that people don't want to come and study your course. And whether that's your MOOC or whether your fee-paying course or whatever it is, people probably aren't going to want to come and study it again. So the converse of that is, if you run a really good course that's really well designed and fantastic, then people will want to come and study your main courses. So this is Ian Whitehead, who is he's Canadian. He's the guy who bought the very first iPad in Canada. So an iPad is probably a good product, I think it's fair to say. It's well designed, it's nice, it's Gucci, it's a good thing. And he is absolutely over the moon that he's got it. And he's the first one to get it. So how do we emulate that? Now on the opposite side, and this will remain completely nameless, this is from a course. I don't know if everybody can read that. This is I agree with you all, the course is a complete mess. I cannot start the videos and the group allocation is confusing and not user-friendly at all. I think this will affect the reputation of X institution, and again I won't name it. By definition, a course in online education should be well organised, easy to use and effective. This is just the opposite, and this is, I have to say I didn't find this is from a blog post. So potentially if something goes wrong, it can have an adverse effect on your course and on what happens afterwards. So ultimately, how do we make a good MOOC? And this is the Quality Assurance Agency. I don't know if everybody's heard of those. In the UK, we have quite a structured system of maintaining the quality of courses, and this is to do with validated, approved courses in universities. And the QAA statement is that they basically want to recognise MOOCs rather than constrain them. So the message here really is they don't want to have anything to do with them. They want to just go for it and see what happens. Although I have to say that a report was published a couple of months ago which looks more detail into quality. So basically we can do what we want. Is that a good thing? I'm not entirely sure. And so this is George Siemens, who's here today. He proposed 9 easy steps of how we can design a course. So we find a topic, find someone to teach it, determine what's in it, plan the spaces of interaction, plan the interactions, iterate and improve, plan your continued presence, learner creation, promote and share, and iterate and approve. Now my personal view on this is that this is quite simplistic, and this is what we looked at originally when we designed our courses, and I'll talk about those in a minute, but it's not detailed enough for us. So we looked at what the general problems were of MOOCs, and that there's no formal structure that's at least defined. And again, the instructor's role is not clearly defined. It's different across different platforms and institutions. Everybody does it differently. There often isn't a quality assurance process. They adopt broadcast principles, so the future learn with the BBC, for instance, will make sure that something is fit for broadcast, but not necessarily look at the detailed underpinning mechanisms, which is what I've said there. So there's very little analysis of actual underlying pedagogic principles. The high numbers of students, if we're talking hundreds of thousands of students, it basically means there's very high risk. So if you've got 400,000 students on your course and they all go out and say, don't do that course, it's terrible, it was done by X university, that could have a negative effect on your institution. So the philosophy that we kind of developed in the development of our courses was this, that we wanted to make them high quality, free and open to all. We wanted to give people the higher education experience, whatever that was, being part of something. We wanted to produce something innovative and unique, distinctly Derby is the phrase that's been used before. We developed an online learning framework which underpins all the rest of our accredited courses and uses a disaggregated model. So if you're the person who's facilitating the course, you're the expert in doing that. If you're the person who's admitting students, you're the expert in the person that's doing that. We also developed an academic framework to support the development of MOOCs, which I'm going to show you about in a minute. And then also 5 institutional principles. And these will be very common to most of you: activity-driven course design, responsive tutoring, social learning, flexible online tools, and developing online skills as well. So quite broad really, but as a good base to use. The important thing that we wanted to do though is to bring MOOCs into line with other validated or approved fee-paying courses. So I also run a BSc Nursing Studies course, and we wanted the opportunity and the experience to be the same as if somebody was studying that, as if they were paying the money to come to you in your normal institution. So I've talked to you about quality assurance, but what is it? It's basically the process that the university goes through to make sure that the educational process is to the standards. Now this definition is from Hong Kong, and it says that in the standards that it sets itself. Well, we don't do that. We look to external benchmarks like subject-specific benchmarks or the QAA, for instance, to use that as an example of how we can simulate do best practice. So this is the process that we developed, and this is the framework. So we started off by developing quite an extensive proposal process for MOOCs. So the idea is that anybody in the institution will eventually be able to propose a MOOC. It can be whatever they want, provided that it's supported by significant evidence that there's a need for students to study that, or a desire at least, and that it matches the portfolio of the university. So our institution is big on psychology, so let's design a MOOC that's related to psychology, not on surfboard design, for instance. We then go through extensive consultation with industry partners, internally to the university as well as external to the university, and look at the subject-specific benchmarks and the general statements about quality from the Quality Assurance Agency as well. We undergo a significant documentation preparation process, which includes a program specification, a validation approval document, and everything is signed off by a senior of the university to make sure it's the best that it possibly could be. We then have a validation or approval event, which is a 1 or 2 day event where we get everybody in a room that's been involved in the development of the course and have a panel that approves it or doesn't approve it, or with conditions and recommendations and commendations, which is the next step. But we're also hoping in the future to have an external panel member on there as well. So somebody that's in industry, for instance, I'm a nurse, so somebody from the NHS or a doctor maybe that would come and say, yes, you're doing the right thing, or no, you're not. The next steps really are that the course runs, which they have done, and then we go through a process of enhancement, so how can we make it better for next time? And this is something that we're working on at the moment, because we're still kind of quite in our infancy really with MOOCs. So these are the first 5 that we have developed, and the first one is dementia, which was my MOOC. There's a psychology MOOC, a digital literacy MOOC, which sorry, no internet today, an engineering MOOC, which was with local industry partners as well, and a schools MOOC, so aimed at students in schools. So each of these has gone or is going through a quality assurance process to make sure that it's the best it can be, and we're learning from it to sort of think about for the future how we can improve these. So just to summarise, because I'm running out of time, we didn't have to do this process. We could just have sat down and designed it and gone with it ourselves and done it, and I'm sure it would have been great, but we really felt that it would have benefited from some sort of quality assurance process, and it was a lot of pain at times. It is a good thing though, and by going through a quality assurance process, it means that the risk is managed, it improves the student experience, and actually it future-proofs the courses. So there's been some discussion about nanodegrees today. We've given sort of a ballpark figure of credits for our courses that we can, in the future, go back and say, well, okay, if you've done 4 or 5 MOOCs, that's the equivalent to a module, for instance, or whatever it's decided. An average retention rate published is 8%, and actually this, for the 2 that we've just run, digital literacy and dementia was 35%, so 35% completed. And I think this is, obviously it's much more complicated than this, but I think it probably is at least partially benefited by the quality assurance process we've been through to make sure that it's the best it can be. It means these retention rates are quite good. So my advice would be, if anybody's thinking about doing it in the future, although I'm sure most of you have done it, is to design and build a good course with good sound pedagogical underpinnings, and that's obviously what we've just heard in the previous keynote as well, but to make sure that you test it and that they are based upon a model or something that's well accepted. I think there probably is a link that if you have a good MOOC, it might encourage students to come and study your courses, which they may pay fees for instance. So this is one aspect that you might think about as a benefit of the QA process. The clear proposal and assurance processes, lots of places don't have this, and this is what we've kind of developed here. So however you propose and start to develop a MOOC, it's a good thing to do. The thing I think is really important is that you have to know why you're doing it, and lots of people think, oh, I'll run a MOOC because it's a really cool thing to do, or because I want to give something back, or because it'd be really great if my course materials are available. But actually I think it can be used as a two-way instrument really, that you can drive the design of your other courses. It gives you a purpose with the rest of your courses as well. And the experience of it, for me, has been really beneficial to take back to my other courses, so that I can share the good practice from running a MOOC with the rest of my students as well. I've kind of said already that enhancement's the next challenge, and I think it's probably fair to say that a lot of universities perhaps don't see MOOCs as having value, and I think it's a real shame. And perhaps this might be a way of demonstrating rigour in MOOCs to make sure that they are up to the same standards of the rest of courses which are available through universities. My final point to make really about all of this is that this process gives you a shared ownership. So if the course has gone great, I think this process is shared ownership of success. But also, if it's terrible and breaks and it's awful, which I can say hasn't done so far, then it's not just one person who's broken it, it's the team, and actually it avoids failure or avoids problems because you've been through a thorough checking process. And like I said about enhancement, it's the next challenge, but perhaps we could have some sort of cyclical process or even repetitive cyclical processes which improve courses. So whenever we run our courses again, we're going to go through the exact same process each time to make sure that the very best they can be. And that's it. Thank you very much. I think we'll take questions.
Does anyone have questions? If you do, just please use the mic because we're capturing this the best way to get it.
That was great, thanks. I was curious when you talk about how you set up the QA piece, in terms of how to make it its best. It sounds like it's really content specific, and so I was wondering if there are any components that have to do with the creation of the course itself that are true across the board, or are you recreating this QA process for each new course?
Well, the QA process is the same across each course. So the idea is that we can template and reuse that purpose, so reuse that process. So once it's all laid down, you can then, if you wanted to write a course on surfboard design, you can do, or underwater flower arranging, for instance, you can do the exact same process. And the idea is that it will standardise and benchmark each course. I think it's not just content. To look at content is one aspect of a multifaceted beast, I think. This also looks at activities and ensures that they're pedagogically sound, and that just the general processes within the MOOC as well. It also looks at operational processes, so are there enough people to run the MOOC, to staff it, to design it and build it? What's the platform that it runs on? What's that like? Has that been tested, for instance? So it's not just, it's much more comprehensive than simply looking at videos and text, because that's what a proofreader does. right? So it's much broader than that.
Any other questions? All right, so our next speaker, thank you so much, David, that's great. Let's give him a round of applause. So unfortunately, Jennifer DeBoer didn't check in, so we're going to have a little more time to spend on the other three speakers. If we do run short, we can come back for an open QA session. So that brings us to Giora, Alexandron, who is going to be talking about using prediction models to analyze the effectiveness of the instructional resources in MOOCs. Very exciting. Give him a second to set up.
Okay, we're connected. Thank you. Okay, I'm Giora Alexandron, and I will speak about using finding instructional resources that assist students in solving questions, and that's an EDM approach, which is stands for educational data mining. That's like data-driven approaches to learn which resources help students. So first, the research goals. So basically, we want to find which instructional resources assist students in solving specific questions. So possible application of that are, for example, data-driven feedback to instructor. Things like, for example, do my resources really help? Like, as an instructor, you put resources into the course, and you hope that these resources will help the students in solving specific questions. That's based on your expert analysis of what resources help the students, but we want to give data-based feedback to instructors saying if these resources really help. Or maybe, do you want to know if maybe you have questions that actually don't have resources that support them? So again, you put resources that you think are good for some questions, but maybe eventually when you look on the use of these resources, you find out that they actually don't support the questions that you think they support, or maybe they don't support questions at all. And eventually, if we know which resources support each question, maybe we can use that to build some recommendation engines that gives students on real time, at point of demand, a recommendation of what the resources to use in order to solve specific questions. Closely related work, so Champagne et al. Showed that the learning at scale 2014, a work in which they look on the contribution of types of resources for solving questions, different kinds of questions. We look on the contribution of specific resources, not types of resources. McCarty and Pardos on the latest Education and Data Mining Conference showed the work in which they can show how to, by using prediction models with and without videos, they can give some measure of how much videos contribute to the learning. So that's a little bit related to what we do. We use another machine learning approaches. And if we focus on our contributions, then again, that's quantifying the effect of the specific resources to specific questions. And if we look on the context, the course on which we are looking is our MOOC, our physics MOOC, given by our course. And basically what you see here is the interface of the edX system. So here we have the list of the chapters, and each chapter you can browse into the sequence of learning activities. Each of these is a vertical, and a vertical may contain various kinds of learning activities. Here you see a problem. It can also contain videos or e-text, and these are the things that we consider as resources: pages, videos, problems. Now, what we want to look is on the different paths that the student take through this course. It's not a tutoring system. Student can take various paths. One student can go straight to the questions. Another student can go and see some resources and then go to the question. And also, students can interact with different kind of resources, before they do the question. So, for example, assume we have a few questions, and this is the path of the first question. So, the first student, so this student interacting with resource R1, R stands for resource, R1 stands for just an index for the first resource in the course maybe. Then the student interacts with resource 2, and then the student makes an incorrect attempt on this question. We are now looking on a modeling for a specific question. The path of the second student look a little bit different. He's trying resource 3, maybe it's playing a video, maybe it's looking on an e-text, then he's going to resource 2, and then he makes a correct attempt to the question. And student 3, a little bit different task, student 4, a little bit different task, so that's the passes. And our underlying assumption is that the different history of interaction with the resources contribute to the ability to solve the questions. So we put that in a matrix, which represented, each row in the matrix represents the interaction of a student before attempting the question. So this row stands for the interaction of this student, and what we see here, for example, is that we put 1 on this column. Each column represents whether the student interacted with this resource before attempting the question. So 1 here means that this student interacted with resource 1 before attempting this question, and false 1 here represents the interaction with this resource. 0 and 0 represents that the student didn't interact with resource 3 and 4 before he made the incorrect attempt, and the tag of the incorrect attempt is represented by false. So basically, we take the interaction of the students and the outcome, and we represent that in a matrix which contains binary features, 0, 1s. Now our question is whether the resource history can predict the success in the problems. Now, as an instructions, you might say, okay, of course, I'm putting materials, and these materials support questions, but that's sometimes might be a naive approach, especially in MOOCs. For example, some of the students in the course are teachers, so it might be that it doesn't matter which resources they see, they can succeed in the problem. But our assumption is that the interaction with the resource history carries some information about the ability of whether this student will be able to solve the question. So the first thing that we do is that we try to quantify if these assumptions is true. So for that we build prediction models that are based on this encoding that connects between the interaction and the success. And for that we use a regression model. Specifically, we use a logistic regression. More specifically, we use a logistic regression in which we regularize the effect. I'm not getting into detail, but specifically, this kind of regression tends to find a small number of coefficients that will be positive. We also require that the coefficients in this regression will be positive under the assumptions that instructional resources only increase the ability of the students, that resources cannot interfere with the ability to solve the question. So basically, this is a formula in the regression, and what it basically says, if we interpret it, basically it says the probability of getting the question correctly based on the resources seen. So we want to see if this regression is able of predicting student success. Now, in order to know if it does, we need to compare it to some reference model. So our reference model is quite a similar model that encodes only student performance. So basically, we take a model which is based only on the student performance, and a model that also knows what resources the students saw before attempting the question, and we compare these two models, and this gives us an indication of whether the resources have predictive power in telling us whether the student is going to be to solve the question correctly or not. So we compare these models, and a way to compare these models is this is what is called an area under the curve. It's a way to measure the performance of this kind of predictive model. I'm not getting into the details of what this says, but basically, the higher, the better. So what we see here is a comparison between the two models. The blue model is the model that sees the resources, and the red line represents the model that doesn't see the resources. And the maximum here is like the higher the better. The max, basically, the quality measure of this curve is the area under the curve. So AUC stands for area under the curve. So basically this curve, that is the quality of the model that sees the resources, is 0.83, while the quality of this model that is based only on performance is 0.78. So basically what we get from here is that on this specific question, this is for a specific question, for this specific question, seeing the resources adds a little bit to the ability to know if the student is going to get the question right or not. And if we look on all the questions, so basically what we have here for this question is basically these two lines here. Okay, each blue dot represents the area under the curve of this, the quality of the prediction of the model for one question with resources and without resources. So basically that's the quality of all the models that see the resources, and that's the quality of all the models that are the reference models that don't know about the resources. And if we just look at the mean value, so the mean value of the models that sees the resources is a little bit better. So the answer to our question of whether the resource history carries some information about prediction, about student ability to be able to solve the question is yes. It carries information. And now the next step is that we ask ourselves is whether we can use it in a more detailed way. By more detailed way, I mean, let's look on the coefficients themselves. And let's see if the coefficients themselves tells us something. So basically, what we see here are the coefficients for one question. And basically, we take all the coefficients and we put them here. And basically, what the coefficient mean says is how important this resource is. And now we want to take this to the expert and get some evaluation from the experts, saying to us whether indeed the positive coefficient that the regression found means that these are resources that the expert believe are important resources. So we did some expert validation process. So we took one question. Those are the coefficients. Those are the resources that the algorithm found as meaningful resources. And we asked the expert, the course instructor, are these resources really helpful for that question? So basically, those are names, indexes of 6 resources, and that's the evaluation of these resources by the expert. So for one resource we have no, for another we have somewhat, not, high, relevant, not relevant, high relevant. So if we give to somewhat like half points, then basically we get on this question like 1, 1.5, 2.5 out of 5. That's like 50% relevance of the resources for this question. And on a sample of 10 questions that we gave to the experts to evaluate, we got that about 42.5% of the resources found by the algorithm as with meaningful coefficients were identified by the experts as meaningful resources for those questions. That's if we would just pick the resources by chance, then resources that we show to the experts and that we just picked randomly just to get an evaluation of whether 42.5 means something or something like 25 to 30%. So that's better than chance. What about the rest of the almost 60% of the resources that the algorithm found and the experts said that are not relevant? So that's maybe a noise, but it is also possible that those are like behavioral relations. For example, sometimes, I don't know, a good student tends to do, for example, survey questions, and also the good student is better at solving questions. So we saw that in some cases the regression reported the survey questions as contributing to the to the outcome question. Now, of course, that's not a causal model, but the regression is not a causal model. Okay, but the question is how much or to which extent we can take the models that we get from the regression and interpret it as a causal model. Okay, so another question that we asked ourselves is whether no positive coefficients mean no good resources. So, for example, for this question, the regression found no positive coefficients at all. Now, does this mean that this question don't have any resources that are good for this question? That might be a very interesting feedback for the instructor, that for this question, you don't have any resource that are helpful for. So again, we asked the course instructor, and what the course instructor said regarding this specific question is that this is a complicated question that requires synthesizing knowledge from two chapters, energy and momentum. Now, we know that synthesizing knowledge is if we, for example, look on a Bloom taxonomy, that's a relatively high kind of knowledge, and it might be that if you have a complicated question, you need scaffolding questions that will help you reach to that level. So it might be, for example, that in this case, you gave a too complex question, and you need scaffolding questions that will help you to reach to this stage. So that's a second kind of analytics that we can take out, that we hope that we have some evidence that we can take from this modeling. Again, on a sample of questions that with no positive coefficients that we gave to the expert, then 60% of the questions that the algorithm found as no positive coefficients were reported by the expert as questions without good resources. The way we measured that is that we took two experts. We gave to each of them 10 questions. 10 of these 10 questions, 5 were questions that were found as no coefficients, and the other were just random questions. Because we wanted to know, we didn't want to have a bias here. It's like it was a kind of a blind trial. So each of them got 10 questions. He knew that some of these questions are questions without positive resources, and what we asked the expert was, what are the questions among these questions? What are the questions that don't have good resources in the course? And then we took out the responses and compared that to the questions given by the model. So there was 60% agreement between each of the experts and the algorithm, but between the experts, the agreement was a little bit lower. So in this case, it might be that experts are not always the agreement between experts on which questions don't have good resources might be not a very stable kind of interpretation, but in this case the agreement between the experts and was lower than the agreement between the experts and the algorithm. Okay, so lessons learned. So one lesson is that time series analysis of MOOCs data enables to build models that relate between the interaction of students with specific resources and the ability of these students to solve specific questions. As the resource history carries some information that improves the prediction of success on specific items, this probably tells us that the resources are important for solving the questions. And so far, using these models to interpreting these models as a causal relationship between resources and assessment items brings some partial results. It's a work in progress project. Some challenges and limitations. Some of the factors that we think are very significant in this, that have a significant effect on this modeling are, for example, the kind of data that we are using. We are using MOOC data from our course. So first of all, it is very biased data. It's affected, the passes of the students are not totally random. They are affected by the structure of the course. Also the data is very noisy. for example, some of the students or teachers, they already know the material, so it's like they are immune to the treatment. It doesn't matter if you show them this video or that video. They know it doesn't matter. They know the answer to the question. And also we know that we have some cheaters in the course. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, about students that we know that hold multiple accounts and using them to harvest solutions, and another account that they use to plug in this solution. So these two groups are groups that insert also knows into the system, because the harvesting students, they just use brute force to get the solution, and the students and then the account that then use this solution, they just take solution that were brought from somewhere else. Another assumption that underlies this system is that the knowledge of the students come from their interaction, not from the interaction of another student. So that's an example of two groups of students that add noise into the data, and also the data is, for this kind of modeling, you need a lot of data. MOOC data is big, but probably far from being big enough for complete analysis of this type. Also, the modeling, we deliberately decided not to model factors that are for sure important. For example, the order in which the students interact with the resources, the duration, like we just use a binary feature. Did they see the video or not? But how much time did they see the video? How much time did they look on the page? Obviously, that is something that is important. We use some threshold to decide whether to include this resource or not. But obviously, there is more information than we are using. And eventually, there is some trade-off here between the complexity of the modeling and the accuracy and the interpretability. Like if you are using more complex models, then it might be that, for example, you can capture interactions between resources, which is something that the logistic regression doesn't capture. But on the other hand, it might be harder to interpret the results. Like, what does this mean? Does this mean that this resource is important, or like the combination of some resources, it becomes to be less human readable if you're using more sophisticated machine learning algorithms. Okay, so that's it. Last thing, thanks for the relay group taking in a sunny day, but a little bit colder than it is now.
Okay, we have a few moments for questions if... Okay, 1 second.
So I know that you mentioned towards the end some of the factors that might be difficult to build into the model. I was wondering if you attempted to try and weight different types of resources within the model. Different types of resources. So at the beginning, correct me if I'm wrong, but I saw that there were not just video resources, but there were activities, reading, various types of resources. Is that correct? My understanding. Was there any sort of attempt to build or differentiate those different types of resources, or weigh them differently to see how that might be, that might predict certain learning outcomes or sort of future success?
Well, basically that's one of the things that we are trying to, it's part of the list that we are already looking at and have some partial results. Now, I didn't request this question, but I prepared in advance this slide. So basically, if we look on the effect of the resources, then we can also, if we look on this column, so for example, it would represent the effect of this resource on the rows we have the questions. So here we have the effect of this resource on all the questions. So if we then group the effect, summarize this resource, all the resources, and then group the effect by type, so like videos, problems, e-text, that's the kind of grouping that we tried. So what we saw is that basically problems have the biggest effect. Now, again, when I'm showing this, there's some underlying assumption here that I use the word effect, but I'm saying it, but at the same time I'm saying that this is not a causal model. So this kind of interpretation makes some assumptions that there is causality here. If you want to interpret it as saying that questions have more contribution to learning in general than videos, for example. Now, of course, we know that questions have very high contribution for learning, but so that's thing that we are looking at.
Right.
How to use it in different ways. So, for example, if you look on the matrix of the coefficients, you can think on ways to group items within. For example, we try to group questions by checkpoint questions and quiz questions. And one of the things that we see is that checkpoint questions tend to have, they tend to need less resources than quiz questions. Now, and that's make perfect sense, because typically quiz questions are more conceptual, are more complex and require more resources in order to solve them.
Thank you.
All right, Zhongzhou, why don't you get started, and then we can take one more question while you're getting, because we don't want to eat up any of your time. We'll get in the fight on the way back to Boston.
Yes, I was interested at the very beginning. You said you assumed that different resources were either no effect or a positive effect. And yet we also know that different types of learning approaches to learning actually have negative effects on learning outcomes. So I'm just curious, did you actually try to run the model with retaining the possibility of certain resources having a negative impact?
Yeah, we also tried to run the model without the assumption that the coefficients should be positive. The accuracy of these models is higher. But the thing is that that's typically a trade-off between bias and variance in this kind of modeling. You allow more freedom for the regression to look for the coefficient, so it might be that it will find a better fit, but whether that means that's actually reality, I don't know. Here we prefer the simplistic assumption that resources only help, also under the assumption that I know that this is a very well-designed course designed by these two guys, and so well, in other courses you might want not to use it, because there is some evidence that resources can actually interfere with learning. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Give me a round of applause. All right, also from MIT, Zhongzhou is.
My name is Zhongzhou Chen, and you can just call me Chen. This is my first name, and I use it as a quiz question. It's pretty hard. So the title of my talk is The Impact of Video Production Style on Instructor Performance, and you read it correctly. It's instructor performance, although most of the studies focus on student performance. So videos are a core component of many MOOCs. In the experiment, excuse me, in the experiment setting, we have a pretty difficult homework problem, and we provided a link to the video that explains how to do this experiment, this difficult homework problem. And we prompted the students to attempt the problem at least once before watching the video. Notice that this is just a piece of text that's on the video. Students can do whatever they want. And there's a link back to solving the problem. Now comes the wonderful functionality of the edX platform to be able to split the entire population into A and B and give them different things. So we gave half of the students the newer TA videos, the other half the instructor-dominant old versions of the videos. And to make things fair, in 1 week we give one group two AT videos and one group 2 old version of videos, and on the next week we flipped the two, the control and the treatment. So that's our it's fine. So that's our experiment design. Now I wanted to share with you some observation on how students are using this video. They have the problem. Come on. Open the problem. And they have until their last submission. And we're interested in those who watched the video between their problem opening and their last submission. So based on your experience, given a pretty hard problem and a video that contains the solution, what percentage of students will actually use this video? In a MOOC, it's only 30%. These are not the familiar students that I used to deal with. Okay, that gives us about 40 to 100 students per group. What's even more amazing is that the population who made the first attempt, then watched the videos, and then made the last attempt. So they took their first attempt, given the video there, actually took our suggestion, challenged themselves on the first attempt. And you see, that's a lot. That's close to 50, 60%, and this is an underestimate because of some issues with the time data. So the majority of students are actually taking the first attempt as the challenge. And a lot of them are actually doing this. They opened the video before their first submission, went back before watching the video, made the first submission, and then came back when they have difficulty, watched the video, and made their last submission. When I told a physics education colleague that my students are doing that, she was like, I was trying to make my students do that for years and without any success. So MOOC students are actually pretty different from our normal students. So what percentage of videos do students watch? This is one example of the watching time distribution. The high peak represents 100% of the video. And a lot of students watch, some students watch more than 100%, which means they go back. And there are students who watch a small fraction of the video. So when we look at the average, these are actually statistically significant because the distribution is strange, so the error bars are strange, and we use this Mann-Whitney U-test to test the difference in the distribution. So the funny thing is, in these two videos, the assisted tutoring video actually has people view it less than the old version of instructor dominant video, and the trend is flipped here. Why? We looked and we found a really trivial answer. In this video, the instructor almost reviewed the answer, went one step further, closer to the answer. So yeah, it helps people understanding. In these two videos. In these two videos, the instructor stopped at exactly the same point, and you see students produced a longer watching time. Why is that? We looked into the difference in viewing behavior with this one basic assumption. So if you have a more engaging video, students will watch the video without much pausing because the video flows smoothly, right? And if you have a less engaging video, and the students are trying to look for information, they would go play, search, play, search, play, search, that kind of thing. Okay, you would see shorter playing events. So the first thing we looked at was how many long views meaning greater than 70% of the video length, which means they're actually watching the video as you watch any other interesting YouTube videos. And we found that if you look at these two videos here, the percentage of people who had at least one long view is significantly higher in the new version, in the more fluent version, than the older version. And if you remember, these two videos are actually the videos that have the biggest words per minute differences between the new and the old. So in this study, audiobook-like video actually have people watching it more continuously than the older version. Okay? And if we look at the distribution of the view lengths, you can see that this here means that the older video, in the older video, a lot of students actually made a close to 0% view event. They made a lot of these kind of events, which means searching, looking for a couple of seconds, searching, looking for a couple of seconds. They're basically searching for still shots. What's interesting is that when we compared it to an earlier study, this is a massive study going over a lot of videos, and this is words per minute, and this is student engagement done by edX, I think. This line corresponds to, these lines correspond to different video lengths, and this is the video length that's very similar to our video. And their finding is that slower video speed, this data point actually, this is 40 to 130 words per minute, which is here, actually has higher engagement than faster video. This is around 140 words per second. So their engagement is flipped from our observation. My take on that is that these, well, I don't know. These are data from hundreds of videos, and we have a pretty special case where we match the content pretty closely. Now, effects on problem solving. How do students do on problem solving? Well, obviously, if you review the answer, students do better. If you don't review the answer, on this problem they did approximately the same. On that problem, the older videos, students who watched the older video performed better, and we think that the major reason is that the tablet capture video presented the final equation much bigger, and in our new video settings, the instructor writes it on a whiteboard, and it's a little harder to read. Maybe, we don't have anything conclusive on that. But the differences are small, and the costs went down. So, okay, we found a cheaper way of doing videos. In summary, this is a sample use case of using A/B experiments to actually find out whether it is worth it to shoot videos in a new format or any kind of improvements to your course. And with less cognitive load, our instructor produced more fluent speech, which resulted in more engaging videos. Content is more important than format. If you tell students the answers, they do learn it. MOOC students like to take challenges. A lot of students tend to see the problem not as their homework assignment, but as a chance to learn. At least that's my interpretation of what I'm seeing. Okay? No detectable differences in learning outcome, because I guess they can learn from every other pieces of resource in this course, and Giora may tell me that other resources have more assisted values. So finally, I wanted to thank my undergraduate who did the data analysis, my lovely undergraduate teaching assistant, and last but not least, Dave Pritchard, who can solve physics problems with his eyes closed. Thank you, and welcome for questions. Yes?
How delayed are the learning outcomes? Like, is it a final exam or like the next problem?
The next problem. Actually, it's the previous problem. So students click the link to the video and then click a link back to the problem. So it's instant assessment. So in the problem, there's a link that says, here's a video that can help you. So they click the link, they get the video. And then in the video that says, okay, go back and try the problem. And they click that link.
But I don't care how they do on that problem. I care how they do on the very next problem. Do you have that data?
Oh, very next problem. Good question. I have that data, but I haven't analyzed it. Thank you. Yeah, I would want to look at it. Yeah. Thank you. Any other problems? Questions? Yes.
Here, can I wait? Do you mind if we just because we're recording it?
Oh.
Great, thank you.
just want to second Neil's advocacy because what you might be seeing, what you're calling learning outcome may not be learning outcome.
Yes,
it may be
exactly.
how good are they at watching the video to get the answer and then put it in, as opposed to learning the underlying concept or procedure that you're hoping that problem illustrates they know.
Yes,
so what
exactly.
you would want to do next is give them problems that were like that problem but that were different, but were the same in the deep structure, meaningful way to see if there's any difference in the way the two groups performed on that problem.
Yes, the one thing I wanted to do before I analyzed that data is to make sure that students do the problems in order. And I don't think a lot of them do. So I wanted to make sure that I wanted to get the population that actually did those problems in order. Thank you. Yeah. Very good
It doesn't have to be the problem that you think should be the next problem. It's the next problem they do.
They do. Exactly. Thank you. That's a great point. Yes.
You said that one of the reasons you thought that the learning outcomes were worse or a little worse in the second case was that students couldn't see the blackboard as clear as the tablet PC.
That's my suspicion, but that is not confirmed in any other way.
Oh yeah, but you haven't tried a mixed approach because as if I understood correctly, the teaching assistants write the blackboard before speaking, so you could make a digital superposition of the same content or something to see it more clearly.
Right. The teaching assistant writes the problem out, but the instructor actually wrote the solution. And during the process, he may erase something or change something that makes it a little bit hard to read.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great presentation.
Thank you.
Well, one thing that made me feel good actually was you're finding that a little bit slower speaking speed seems to work well, because for me in my MOOC I did the MOOC Learning How to Learn. We've had over 1 million registered users for it in the last year, and students they seem to really love. I'll get a lot of emails. We really like the speed at which you speak, and I just don't speak that fast. I'm not very quick at it. And my sense from that has been half of our learners are non-native speakers of English, and I think they really love it when you don't speak English too quickly.
Right.
And the ones who do speak English as a native language, they just run it on faster speeds.
Yes,
And
yes,
so
yes.
I think it works for both groups, and maybe
Yes.
that's what you're seeing too.
Thank you. Actually, what we're seeing, well, yeah, more or less. There are two things that I didn't mention that could play a factor in terms of viewing behavior. One is whether they open up the transcript, because some students are actually may actually just be reading the transcript rather than watching the video. What's the other thing? Oh, I forgot. Yeah. Also, the other thing is we didn't look at whether they played the video at 1 point speed, at original speed or 1.5 speed or twice the speed. We really should carefully put that effect into account, and it may change the viewing behavior distribution. Thank you.
You mentioned that the production costs went down in the AT videos, and I'm curious, like, how much and why?
Okay. Thank you. The reason is that previously you have to, first of all, you have to edit the tablet capture video and merge it into the main video stream, so that's extra processing. And then a lot of times the instructor asked the students a question. The student he was tutoring didn't know how to answer, and there's a 5-second delay, or she uttered something that's irrelevant, so you have to look at it and cut it out. In the other format, you don't have to do much post-editing because it's one take. All you have to do is sometimes the instructor is writing some equations and you without talking much, and you fast forward that. That's it. So that's the main cost saving. And plus you don't need a table and everything.
The other question I had is on the we work with a lot of different faculty, and
Yes.
half the time they're like, "This is the way it's going to be." Deal with it, and half the time they'll, you can have a suggestion and impact on it.
Right.
Did you find that it was, do you have any word of mouth from the instructor on how awkward or different this was, or was it easier for him? Was it harder, or how did that process?
I
work
will
when you
refer
changed
your
it up?
question to the actual instructor.
What's up? Sorry, I wasn't listening. What was the question?
Sorry, he said, do you find this new setting awkward or easier to work with?
Yeah, I agree with Chen's comment that when I'm sitting there with a student on each side, then the biggest conflict I felt was a student says something. My normal response is like a tutor, try to twist the thing around and answer it from their framework. But I've got, all the MOOC students out there, and I should answer it from a more standard framework. And then it seems to me that I'm being, I'm not being my usual interactive, a little bit in your face tutor. And that's a conflict for me that I couldn't resolve. And having one student over there and the other student over there, and trying to get them to talk together, that was also awkward. So, but I don't know how to solve those problems, and so I prefer the second format, where Hallie sits there and she says the question to me and to the camera, and it's some of it written down, and or maybe she pre-writes it, or maybe she writes a little bit, and then I just start off and I say, okay, so here's how you solve the problem, and I'm talking to her and to the students. And then if I mess up a little bit and get off track, then she'll try to guide me back. I think that's a better way. Plus, it's cheaper.
One thing I wanted to mention is that it's very important for having a real person standing next to a camera. I don't have an experiment, but according to my experience, when Dave was talking to the camera alone and a teleprompter, we have to take 2 or 3 takes every time for him to say anything, because I've seen many instructors just freeze in front of a camera, but when there's a real student, they come back to life. Yeah, thank you.
I think we got one more question over here.
I'd really like to follow up on Professor Pritchard's comment about the difference between being in a tutoring mode and being in lecture mode. I've been developing very tiny videos for kids for Scratch for the last couple of years with a very good videographer who also writes wonderful scripts. And I guess I'm sort of challenging you and also asking you to try a different video format where you transcribe what Dr. Pritchard says and then have a theater group or a video production group actually stage it and use actors and use people with trained voices, act it out, and then take a look at the metrics. And I'm curious, because we just do it by the seat of our pants. We discovered that with younger kids, the more high production value it has, the more it's been scripted and edited, and there is no talking head. It's just whatever they're looking at plus a voice in the background is far more effective. Now we don't have real data because we're just doing this commercially and by the seat of our pants. But it's an interesting paradigm because there is such a difference between that lecture format and then what we're calling the Sesame Street format and that tutorial format, which is, I think, the hardest one to capture in this kind of MOOC setting.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, this is bonus time, but this is the last question, and you guys have a break.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up. I'm not sure you really need to go to the extreme of having actors act as the instructors. I think you could do that in certain situations, but I do think there's some interesting differences between, and we've done a lot of stuff with video versus from the student perspective. So instead of thinking what's best for the instructor and how they're working through the video as a student and as a student not in the room. And I think in both of the situations of video, the student from home is an observer. and they're really watching an interaction between other actors and other agents. And I think the question would be one of perspective, where when the instructor is talking directly to the student at home and going through something, you feel a lot more of a connection with an individual. And that's one of those big reasons why you would want to have a head or a person talking to another person, because you do feel like you're actually pulled in, as opposed to sort of, I'm sitting in the back of the class and watching an interaction happen. So I think that would be an interesting comparison to add as a layer on top there.
Let me comment on that. Yes. My last comment on this whole theme would be, yes, we can find a lot of ways to improve the video quality. We can even shot our videos, collaborate with BBC and put a British accent on all our videos that makes everything so glorious. But in the end, does it really matter can we really measure any differences in terms of learning outcomes when students are actively trying to learn from all the resources they can get? So there should be a balance between the content quality and, looking outside and looking at the whole experience as a whole, and a balance between quality and cost. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Chen. Thank you
all right,
to all the speakers. We appreciate it.